Hey TechKnowStuds, and when I say studs, I mean both students and you are awesome. Thanks for joining me in these videos. In this module, we're going to start exploring how computers use bits, how they use bits to represent characters like the alphabet, how they represent graphics like pictures, and how they process these bits. So let's jump into how computers use bits. Computers have microprocessors, which are essentially just a bunch of switches. And so there's either a 1 or 0. But how do computers represent everything that they need to represent using these 1s and 0s? This module is really a lot about how do we measure bits and also how do we represent different things using bits. As an example, we're going to start by jumping into binary numbers, and we'll get into the powers of 2 and how these powers of 2 grow exponentially. Then we'll get into bits, nibbles, bytes, and octets, and what each one of those are. It's essentially a measurement of how many bits. Then we'll get into kilo, mega, giga, tera, and peta, which is also a measurement of bits, and we'll see how that's applied. We'll talk about how bits represent different characters like the alphabet. We'll get into how do we store different characters, and I have a little demo on how we're going to explore that. Then we'll get into bits representing graphics. How do we record graphics? How do we present graphics? So we'll get into bits representing graphics. Of course, graphics can get quite large, so we'll also talk about compressing graphics and how we can compress that. We'll talk about raster versus vector graphics, and we'll get into how do we send bits and how do we measure sending bits. And then finally, we'll wrap things up talking about how do we process bits? How do we measure the processing speed of our processors?